At my mother's funeral, my sister sneered. "You wore that to Mom's funeral? I mean, I get it, times are tough for you, but couldn't you have at least tried?" What she didn't know was I owned the brand on her feet and just canceled her contract. My sister Rachel's diamond cuff caught the church light as she flipped her perfectly styled hair, standing there in her $8,000 Valderie cocktail dress like she was posing for photographers. The quartet of women surrounding her nodded sympathetically as she gestured at my simple black dress with her manicured nails. "Mom deserved better than off the rack," she continued, her voice carrying that particular tone of false concern she'd perfected over the years. I smoothed down my dress, hiding a smile. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd designed this dress myself. What she also didn't know was that I owned Valderie, the boutique we were standing in, and Morgan Group, the $2.9 billion fashion empire that had just terminated her modeling contract an hour ago. But she'd find out soon enough. My name is Elise Morgan, and I'd learned long ago that the best revenge is served in couture. The morning had dawned gray and misty over Newport Bay, the kind of weather that made the glass walls of the modern church look like they were weeping. I'd stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, carefully zipping up my creation. Black crepe, minimal structure, no embellishments. To the untrained eye, it looked like something from a department store. To anyone who truly understood fashion, it was a $30,000 piece of wearable art. But my family had never understood anything about what I did. They saw what they wanted to see. Poor, struggling Elise, clinging to Mom's failing boutique while the rest of them built their empires of borrowed success. I'd arrived at the church in my decade-old Prius, parking between Blake's leased Mercedes and Rachel's borrowed Porsche. Through the tall windows, I could see them holding court, accepting condolences like royalty. My father, Gerald, stood near the altar in his 2018 Armani suit, thinking no one would notice it was outdated. Blake, my older brother, kept checking his phone between handshakes, probably monitoring whatever financial disaster he was juggling at his bank. And Rachel posed near the flowers, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. "Oh, Elise, darling." Aunt Martha had caught me at the side entrance, her eyes doing that quick scan wealthy relatives perfected by age 40. "How are you holding up? And how's the little boutique?" "It's fine. Thank you for asking." "You know, my neighbor's daughter just opened a shop on Etsy, doing quite well with handmade jewelry. Maybe you two should connect, share tips." I'd smiled the practice smile I'd perfected over 15 years of family gatherings. "That's very thoughtful. I'll keep it in mind." The service itself had been everything my mother would have hated. Enormous floral arrangements, a string quartet, a pastor who'd met her twice droning about her dedication to family. Mom had been dedicated to her craft, to the small boutique she'd run for 30 years, teaching women that elegance wasn't about labels but about understanding who you were. But it was during the reception that the real show began. "There she is," Rachel's voice carried across the church hall as I approached with my black coffee. She was surrounded by her usual followers, women who thought proximity to a semi-famous model made them influential. "Elise, we were just talking about you." "All good things, I hope," I'd replied, taking a sip of truly terrible coffee. "Of course. I was just telling Vivian how brave you are, keeping Mom's little shop running. Though honestly," she lowered her voice to a stage whisper, "wouldn't it be easier to just work retail? I mean, Nordstrom has excellent benefits." Vivian, whose husband had just filed for bankruptcy but didn't know I knew, nodded sympathetically. "There's no shame in a steady paycheck. My daughter started at Macy's and worked her way up to department manager." That's when Blake appeared at Rachel's shoulder, ever the opportunist when it came to family drama. "Hey, Ellie," he said, using the childhood nickname I'd asked him to stop using when I turned 30. "Listen, if you need to borrow money for something appropriate next time, just ask. We're family." "How generous," I murmured, noting the stress lines around his eyes that concealer couldn't hide. "I'll remember that." "The offer stands for the shop, too," he continued, warming to his role as successful older brother. I could probably get you a small business loan. The rates would be brutal given your situation, but it might keep you afloat a few more months. My situation. If only they knew. Don't overwhelm her. Dad finally joined our little circle, playing patriarch even as I noticed his cufflinks were replicas of the Cartier ones he'd sold 6 months ago. Elise is doing fine with her hobby. Sometimes that's enough for some people. Some people. As if I were a different species, content with less, ambitious for nothing. She's not doing that badly, Rachel conceded with false generosity. That vintage Prius is very eco-conscious, and living in a studio apartment means less to clean, right? The assumptions rolled over me like old friends. The Prius I drove to family events because the Bentley would raise questions. The studio apartment that was actually my private penthouse floor at Meridian Towers. The little boutique that served as my design laboratory when I needed to touch fabric and remember why I'd built an empire. Standing there, surrounded by people who thought they knew my worth down to the dollar, I made a decision. Not out of anger, I'd moved past that long ago, but out of cold, clear recognition that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is show people exactly who they are when the masks come off. My phone buzzed. A message from my assistant about the Valderie contract renewal. Perfect timing. I excused myself to the bathroom, typed a quick response, and returned to find Rachel holding court by the memorial display, telling anyone who'd listen about her upcoming campaign as the new face of the brand. It's basically a done deal, she was saying. The creative director loves my look, says I embody their vision. Successful, sophisticated, uncompromising. I thought about the email I'd just sent, about the meeting tomorrow where that same creative director would explain the brand was moving in a new direction, about the bills piling up in Rachel's Calabasas apartment that she thought no one knew about. That's wonderful, Rachel, I said, raising my paper cup in a toast, to new directions. She beamed, missing the irony entirely. They all did. The next morning, I returned to my mother's boutique on Cypress Avenue. To everyone else, it looked exactly as it had for 30 years, a modest storefront squeezed between a dry cleaner and vintage bookshop. The painted sign reading Eleanor's still hung above the door, its gold lettering faded but dignified. What they didn't know was that I'd purchased the entire block 6 years ago through one of my holding companies. Inside, morning light filtered through original windows, catching dust motes above racks of carefully curated pieces. My mother had possessed an extraordinary eye, able to spot potential in a garment the way others might recognize a masterpiece. I'd learned at her knee, watching her transform women with a tuck here, a suggestion there, understanding how clothes could be armor or wings depending on what you needed. My phone buzzed with the family group chat Dad had created after Mom's diagnosis. He'd named it Grief Support, though it functioned more as a bulletin board for their performances of success. Blake said, crushing it at the quarterly review. Mom would be proud. Rachel said, on set for the Valderie shoot. Thinking of you all. Dad said, close the Steinberg deal. Your mother always said persistence pays. Lies layered upon lies, like poorly constructed garments where the seams showed if you knew where to look. Blake's bank was under federal investigation for predatory lending. Rachel wasn't on any set. Valderie had suspended her contract pending restructuring, though she hadn't received the termination notice yet. And Dad's Steinberg deal? I'd had my lawyers kill it last week when I discovered it involved my mother's memorial fund as collateral. I set my phone aside and walked through the boutique, running my fingers along fabrics. In the back office, hidden behind a panel my mother had installed, lay the real heart of the space. My first design studio, where E. Morgan Atelier had been born 15 years ago, while my family thought I was playing shopkeeper. Every major collection began here, in this 12 by 15 room with its ancient Singer sewing machine and walls covered in my mother's careful notes about construction and drape. My assistant Alyssa called as I examined a bolt of Italian wool my mother had saved for something special. Good morning, Ms. Morgan. I have the reports you requested. Go ahead. Your brother's bank is facing a liquidity crisis. The federal investigation is expanding. His personal assets are leveraged at 340% of their value. I wasn't surprised. Blake had always confused the appearance of wealth with its reality, never understanding that true power came from what you could build, not what you could borrow. Your father's real estate holdings are in foreclosure proceedings on 3 properties. He's been using creative financing to hide the losses, but the house of cards is collapsing. Estimated timeline 6 to 8 weeks before it becomes public. And Rachel? Living on maxed credit cards. Her apartment lease ends next month, and she doesn't have funds for renewal. The Valdery termination will be official tomorrow. No other agencies are showing interest. I closed my eyes, seeing my baby sister at 5, parading around in Mom's heels, declaring she'd be famous someday. She'd gotten her wish, in a way. Instagram famous counted for something in Los Angeles until the bills came due. There's more, Alyssa continued. They've been approaching your business contacts. Blake reached out to Nathaniel Brooks at Brooks Industries about a family investment opportunity. Rachel contacted 3 of your brand ambassadors, suggesting they could get friends and family discounts. Your father has been name-dropping you to potential investors, implying a connection to Morgan Group without saying it outright. Now that was interesting. They'd spent years dismissing my work, yet when desperate, tried to trade on a connection they didn't even know they had. Send me the full files, I instructed, and move forward with the plans we discussed. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. 3 women from yesterday's funeral, Rachel's usual quartet, minus their queen, stood uncertainly at the boutique door. Is this a bad time? Vivian asked, her voice carrying genuine concern despite the Botox preventing much expression. Not at all. How can I help you? They exchanged glances. We wanted to apologize for yesterday. Rachel can be enthusiastic, I supplied diplomatically. Cruel, Vivian corrected, and we went along with it. Your mother was always kind to us, and we disrespected her memory by treating you that way. I studied them carefully. 3 women clinging to relevance in a city that worshipped youth, surrounding themselves with people like Rachel, who made them feel connected to something desirable. They weren't bad people, just lost ones. Would you like some tea? They stayed for an hour, marveling at the boutique's hidden treasures, sharing stories about my mother I'd never heard. Vivian had been dressed by my mother for her wedding 30 years ago. She made me feel like Grace Kelly, Vivian said, touching a vintage scarf reverently. Not just beautiful, but significant. Like I mattered. That had been my mother's gift. Seeing people. Really seeing them, and reflecting their best selves back through fabric and form. It was the principle I'd built Morgan Group on, scaled to a global level. After they left, pressing cards into my hand and insisting on lunch, when you're ready, I locked up and drove to my real office. Not to the executive floors at Haven Tower that would come later, but to the design studio in the Arts District where my senior team awaited. Show me the numbers, I said, settling into the conference room. The presentations rolled past. Quarterly earnings up 18%. Asian expansion ahead of schedule. 3 potential acquisitions in Europe. But my mind kept drifting to family, to the elaborate fictions they'd constructed about their lives and mine. The Valdery situation, my VP of Brand Management said carefully. Do we proceed with the termination? I thought of Rachel's sneer, her casual cruelty, her assumption that I was somehow less. But I also remembered her at 7, crying because someone at school called her ugly, and how I'd spent hours teaching her to braid her hair into a crown, telling her she was a queen. Proceed, I said quietly, but include the standard transition package. She'll need it. My team knew better than to question the generosity. They didn't know Rachel was my sister. I'd kept my family entirely separate from my business life. To them, she was just another model whose behavior had become a liability. That evening, I stood on my private terrace at Meridian Towers, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, my family was maintaining their facades, unaware that the foundations were already crumbling. Blake would discover the federal audit tomorrow. Dad would receive foreclosure notices by week's end. Rachel would wake to an email shattering her carefully curated image. I could stop it all with a few phone calls, wire transfers to cover their debts, word to the right people to make problems disappear. It would cost me barely a fraction of what I'd earned last quarter. But that would require them seeing me, really seeing me. And in 20 years, they'd never managed that. I was the daughter who'd inherited Mom's hobby, the sister happy with simple things, the family member they could pity to feel better about themselves. My phone rang, an unknown number, but I recognized the prefix from the federal building downtown. Ms. Morgan, this is Agent Davies with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We understand you might have information relevant to our investigation into Western Pacific Bank, Blake's bank, where he'd proudly become regional manager, never questioning why they'd promoted him so quickly, never wondering if his last name had played a role. I might, I said carefully. What specifically are you investigating? As Agent Davies outlined their case, fraud, predatory lending, money laundering, I realized my brother wasn't just arrogant. He was complicit. The family tragedy I'd been orchestrating might be mercy compared to what was coming legally. We'd appreciate your cooperation, Agent Davies concluded, given your position in the financial community. Send me the formal request. I'll have my lawyers review it. After hanging up, I poured a glass of wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux I'd been saving for a special occasion. My family's illusions weren't just crumbling, they were about to explode. And at the center of it all, they'd find me. Not the Elise they'd invented, poor, struggling, pitiable, but the real one. The one who'd taken our mother's wisdom about understanding people and built it into something they couldn't imagine. Tomorrow, the first dominoes would fall. Wednesday arrived with the kind of Los Angeles morning where the city existed in soft focus until the sun burned through. I woke to a symphony of notifications from my family's desperation reaching crescendo. Blake said, "They froze everything, can't even buy gas." Rachel said, "Lost the apartment, have 48 hours to move. Please call me." Dad said, "Emergency family meeting tonight. Your childhood home. We need you." The childhood home he'd renovated 3 times, now facing foreclosure because he'd gambled it on development deals that existed only in his imagination. I dressed carefully in another of my designs, disguised as department store mediocrity. The genius was in the cut, how the fabric moved, details invisible to anyone who didn't understand that true luxury whispered rather than screamed. I received the call I'd been expecting. "Elise?" My father's voice held a tremor I'd never heard before. "I need you to come to the house. Family meeting, it's urgent." "I'll be there by 7. "No, now please, we need you now." The please almost made me waver. Almost. 7, I repeated. "I have business to finish first." The drive to Bel Air took 40 minutes, winding through hills to the house where I'd learned love was conditional and worth was measured in appearances. The modern monstrosity my father had built stood lit like a beacon, every window blazing as if light could ward off closing darkness. I parked the Prius between Rachel's abandoned Porsche and Blake's impounded Mercedes, now bearing a bright yellow boot. The tableau captured automotive dysfunction perfectly. Rachel answered the door, mascara smudged, designer clothes wrinkled from stress. "Thank God you're here. Maybe you can talk sense into them." Inside, the house echoed with the hollow sound of lives built on credit. Furniture remained for now, but I could see gaps where artwork had been sold, pale rectangles on walls marking disappeared investments. Blake sat hunched on the white leather sofa, laptop open, frantically typing, still trying to hack into systems that would forever elude him. Dad stood by windows staring at city lights as if they held answers. "She's here," Rachel announced unnecessarily. They turned to me, and I saw the moment when the dismissed became essential. They needed me, or thought they did. They believed poor, simple Elise might have savings to contribute, connections to exploit, comfort to offer. "Sit," Dad commanded, still trying to play patriarch even as his kingdom crumbled. "We need to discuss the situation." "Which situation?" I asked mildly, choosing a chair that kept me separate from their cluster. "Blake's federal investigation? Rachel's terminated contracts? Your impending foreclosure?" They stared. Rachel spoke first. "How did you—" "I read the news. Blake's bank has been headline fodder for days. Rachel, your Instagram stories about new beginnings weren't exactly subtle. And Dad, you've been shopping for loans at every institution in the city. People talk." "Then you understand why we need to come together," Dad said, switching to his salesman voice. "Families support each other through difficult times. Do they?" I tilted my head. I must have missed that lesson. Blake looked up from his laptop, anger flashing. "This isn't time for your victim complex, Ellie. We have real problems." "Yes, you do. Federal investigation, possible prison time, financial ruin, social disgrace. Very real problems indeed. Which is why we need to liquidate everything possible," Dad continued, ignoring the tension. "Including Mom's boutique. I found a buyer willing to pay cash." There it was, the boutique I'd kept running, the space I'd honored, the foundation of everything I'd built. They wanted to sell it for scrap. No. The word dropped into silence. "Elise, be reasonable," Rachel pleaded. "It's just a building. Mom's gone. Keeping it won't bring her back." "The boutique stays." Blake slammed his laptop shut. "You don't get to make that decision. We all inherited equally, 3 against 1. "Actually," I said, pulling out the leather portfolio Alyssa had prepared, "that's not accurate." I set documents on the coffee table, watched their faces change as they read. Power of attorney, estate control, all notarized and filed 3 years ago when Mom updated her will. "She didn't trust you," I continued conversationally. "Isn't that interesting? Even then, she knew you'd try to sell her legacy the moment opportunity arose." "This is fake," Blake snarled. "You forged these." "Feel free to have them authenticated. I suggest Martindale and Associates. Oh, wait, they were your bank's law firm, currently under investigation for fraud. Perhaps someone else." Dad picked up papers with shaking hands. "This gives you control of her entire estate." "Yes, including the investment account you didn't know existed. The one she built by being careful with money while you were all being careless. Currently worth, well, enough to matter." "How much?" Rachel whispered. "More than the quick cash you get from selling the boutique, less than what you need to solve your problems." They exchanged glances, calculations running behind their eyes. How much could they extract from me? How much guilt could they leverage? "There's something else you should know," I said, standing. "The Morgan Group article that published today. The mysterious E. Morgan everyone's talking about. The woman who built a fashion empire worth $2.9 billion. I paused at the door, looking back at their expectant faces. Surprise. The silence had weight, like the pause between lightning and thunder. I watched their faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and fury that comes from realizing you've been catastrophically wrong. "That's impossible," Blake said finally. "E. Morgan is—" "The Wall Street Journal says a fashion revolutionary, a business genius." "Yes, that's me. Hello." Rachel's phone clattered to the floor. "You're lying. You have that stupid boutique. You drive a Prius." "I have multiple cars, multiple homes, multiple lives, since none of you bothered looking beyond the one you'd assigned me." My father found his voice, predictably angry. "Then you've been lying to us for years, watching us struggle while you sat on billions. Tell me, when exactly did you struggle? When you were mocking my life choices at Christmas dinner? When you were offering me retail job suggestions at Mom's funeral? When you were trying to sell her boutique 5 minutes ago?" "We're family," he roared, the sound echoing off empty walls. "Are we? I remember asking for a $10,000 loan 8 years ago to expand the boutique. You laughed, Said I needed to face reality, stop playing dress-up. That was different. I remember Rachel borrowing my designs for a college fashion show, claiming them as her own, then telling everyone I was jealous when I objected. I was young. I remember Blake accessing my credit without permission, running up charges, then convincing you both I was financially irresponsible when I complained. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through saved messages. Would you like me to read the family group chat from 2 years ago? The one where you discussed whether my mental health issues explained why I couldn't succeed like normal people? They went pale. Digital receipts last forever. But none of that matters now. What matters is you need help, and I'm the only one who can provide it. The irony is rather delicious, don't you think? So help us, Dad said bluntly. If you're so rich, so successful, help your family. Why? The simple question broke something in Rachel. She started crying, ugly sobs that ruined her makeup. Because we're sorry, okay? We're sorry we treated you badly. We're sorry we didn't believe in you. Is that what you want to hear? No, I said gently, because you're not sorry. You're desperate. There's a difference. My phone rang. Alyssa. Yes, I answered on speaker. Ms. Morgan, I apologize for interrupting. The Times is holding on line 1, the Journal wants a follow-up quote, and your 8 p.m. conference call with Tokyo is confirmed. Also, the Valdery board is requesting an emergency meeting about the brand's new direction. Tell the Times no comment. Give the Journal our prepared statement. I'll take Tokyo from the car and schedule Valdery for tomorrow afternoon. Yes, ma'am. Oh, and the forensic accountants found those offshore accounts you asked about. Excellent, thank you. I hung up to find my family staring like I'd grown a second head. That was real, Blake said slowly. All of it. Every word. I checked my watch. Now, I have a conference call in 12 minutes affecting 3,000 employees in Japan, so let's make this quick. I outlined their futures with clinical precision. Dad would lose the house. There was no saving it. Blake would likely face prison unless he cooperated fully with the FBI. Rachel was unemployable in modeling. Her reputation for difficult behavior had spread through every agency that mattered. But, I continued, I can help mitigate the damage. Dad, I'll buy the house through a trust. Let you live here as a renter below market rate. Blake, I'll provide a lawyer who might get you probation instead of jail time. Rachel, there's an entry-level position at one of my subsidiaries. Marketing assistant, minimum wage to start. That's humiliating, Rachel whispered. That's opportunity, more than you offered me when I needed it. Why would you help at all? Blake asked suspiciously. I thought of my mother teaching me to hem skirts in the boutique's back room, telling me that elegance wasn't about what you wore, but how you treated people when you didn't have to be kind. Because Mom would want me to. Because despite everything, you're still my family. And because I can afford to be generous in ways you never could. The dig landed. They flinched collectively. There are conditions. Complete honesty with authorities. No more lies about your situations. No using my name for any purpose. And you'll each write a letter acknowledging how you treated me and apologizing not to me, to Mom's memory. You want us to apologize to a dead woman? Dad's pride flared one last time. I want you to acknowledge who you've been. Maybe that'll help you become better people. My phone buzzed. Time for Tokyo. 24 hours to decide, I said, heading for the door. Alyssa will contact you with details if you accept. If not, best of luck. Wait, Rachel called. Is it true about Valdery? Did you really buy the company that just fired me? I paused at the threshold. Yes, your final campaign photos were beautiful, by the way. You photograph well when you're not sneering. Pity about the attitude. Did you fire me? No, you manage that all on your own. I just declined to interfere with the consequences. As I drove down from the hills conducting billion-dollar business from my decade-old Prius, I thought about tomorrow's board meeting where I'd announce we were launching a new initiative. a foundation supporting young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds, funded by the acquisition of a certain Bel Air property. My family would never know their childhood home would become a force for good, incubating dreams of people like I'd once been. People dismissed by their families, underestimated by society, but burning with the kind of ambition that builds empires from boutique foundations. By the time I reached my penthouse, city lights looked like a circuit board of connection and possibility. Somewhere in those lights, my family was making decisions that would reshape their lives. They'd accept my terms. Desperation made philosophers of fools and beggars of kings. But that was tomorrow's drama. Tonight I had an empire to run, a legacy to honor, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold or hot, or even in couture. Sometimes it's served with grace, with boundaries, and with the kind of success that speaks louder than any words ever could. The next morning brought exactly what I'd expected. 3 separate emails accepting my terms. 3 letters of apology to Mom's memory that would never undo the damage, but marked the beginning of their understanding. Rachel's was the most honest. I can't sleep thinking about what Elise said about you knowing. I threw up when I realized she was at every one of your chemo appointments while I was at Fashion Week. I'm not asking forgiveness. Just want you to know I finally see it. The joke was never on her. Blake's was more analytical, detailing the predatory loans he'd structured targeting fashion startups, offering to help victims rebuild. I targeted them because of Elise, he wrote. Not knowing she was E. Morgan, but knowing fashion was growing. I created products to destroy dreams. I want to make it right. Dad's was the shortest. She built an empire while we built houses of cards. Your daughter became exactly what you said she would. We were too proud to listen. That afternoon, I met Patricia Foster from The Times at a small cafe in Santa Monica. She'd connected the dots, discovered the relationship between Morgan Group and my family's recent difficulties. So, she began, settling into her chair with digital recorder ready, everyone wants to know, how does it feel to be visible? I considered the question, thinking of shadows and light, of building in silence and revealing in thunder. Like taking off a coat I no longer need, useful while it lasted, but the weather's changed. She smiled, understanding the fashion metaphor. And your family? Off limits as agreed, but I'll say this. The years they didn't see me were the years I learned to see myself. That's worth more than recognition, especially from family. Their blindness taught me to value my own vision. The interview ran for an hour, covering business philosophy, expansion plans, the vision for sustainable luxury that would define Morgan Group's next decade. When it published the next day, the headline read, "The Fashion Revolutionary Who Hid in Plain Sight." 6 months later, I stood in my mother's boutique, now officially designated as Morgan Group's flagship incubator. Rachel was behind the counter, finally understanding that every transaction mattered, that fashion was about service, not just surface. She'd stopped sneering, started learning. Blake was serving his 18-month sentence at minimum security, teaching financial literacy to inmates, helping them avoid the mistakes he'd made. The Miranda Stone Recovery Fund, supported by the Blake Morgan Restitution Trust, had already helped 37 designers restart their careers. Dad had downsized to the guest house, learning to live within his means for the first time in decades. He'd started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids about construction trades. As I watched Rachel help a customer, I saw echoes of our mother in her movements. The same careful attention, the same desire to help someone see themselves differently. My phone buzzed with messages from the fashion world, all wanting to understand the mystery of E. Morgan finally revealed. But I silenced it all, choosing instead to sit in the quiet of my mother's space. The boutique door chimed. Another customer, another chance for transformation, another moment in the endless, elegant conversation between who we are and who we're becoming. I stood, smoothed my simple black dress, worth more than most people's cars but looking like nothing special, and went to help them see. Because that's what fashion had always really been about. Becoming who you were meant to be, especially when everyone else was looking the other way.